This is the image burned into our collective memory. Thousands of slaves, beaten, starved, dying under the desert sun, building an impossible tomb for a tyrannical pharaoh. And it is almost entirely a lie. A lie so powerful it has lasted for millennia. A lie that insults the very people it claims to depict. The truth? The truth is far more incredible. So if slaves didn't build the pyramids, who did? The answer to that question remained buried right next to the pyramids themselves. For centuries, we searched inside the pyramids for answers, but the real evidence was found in 1990, just south of the Great Pyramid. They weren't looking for treasure. They were looking for the builders, and they found them. They found their cemetery, a city of the dead for the men and women who raised the Giza complex. And this is where the slave theory begins to completely fall apart. Think about it. You do not give a slave an honored burial. You especially do not bury a slave right next to the sacred tomb of your god king. These were not the mass graves of a disposable workforce. These were the tombs of respected artisans, craftsmen, and laborers. They had titles: Inspector of the Masons, Overseer of the West Side. They were buried with jars of beer and bread for the afterlife. Some were even buried in small pyramid-shaped tombs, mirroring the great one they built. These were people with pride, people with status. So who were they? They were Egyptians, a highly organized, well-fed, paid workforce. Archaeologists uncovered the workers' village and their kitchens. What were they eating? Not gruel. They were eating thousands of pounds of prime beef, sheep, and goat every single week. This was the best food, sent from the fertile Nile Delta straight to the Giza Plateau. They had medical care. Skeletons show evidence of broken arms and legs that were professionally set. They even performed complex surgeries, like amputations, where the patient survived for years afterward. You don't waste that kind of care on a slave. You do it for a valued employee. And we know exactly how they were organized, because they left graffiti. Not modern spray paint, but official team names painted in red ochre on the chamber walls. Names like the Friends of Khufu Gang, or the Drunkards of Menkaure. Yes, seriously. This wasn't a death march. This was a national project. Experts believe about 20,000 to 30,000 workers were involved. Many were skilled permanent employees. Others were conscripts, farmers who worked on the pyramid during the Nile's annual flood, when their fields were underwater. They worked in 3-month shifts, were paid in food, beer, and cloth, and then returned home. This was the greatest construction project in human history, built by a motivated, organized, and honored society. So if the evidence is so clear, where did the Great Pyramid lie come from? Well, you can mostly blame this guy. This is Herodotus, the father of history. He visited Egypt around 450 BC, which is 2,000 years after the Great Pyramid was built. That's like you or me trying to describe what really happened during the building of Stonehenge. He was a tourist. He listened to the local guides who were spinning fantastical tales, and he wrote them all down. He wrote that 100,000 men worked in brutal conditions. He didn't invent the slave myth, but he was the first to popularize it. But the man who cemented it in our minds was this guy, Cecil B. DeMille. In the 1950s, Hollywood needed an epic story of good versus evil. The slaves versus Pharaoh narrative drawn from the Book of Exodus, which itself doesn't even mention the pyramids, was just too good to pass up. This one film, The 10 Commandments, did more to shape our view of ancient Egypt than 2 millennia of history. The image of Jewish slaves building the pyramids became fact, even though it was fiction. Why does this matter? Why correct a 2,000-year-old story? Because the slave myth robs the ancient Egyptians of their true achievement. The slave story makes the pyramid a monument to brutality, but the truth makes it a monument to human ingenuity. It makes it a story of project management, of engineering, of logistics so complex we still don't quite figure it all out. It's a story of a nation, tens of thousands of free people organized and inspired to build a stairway to the stars for their king. The real builders of the pyramids weren't slaves. They were engineers. They were accountants. They were bakers, doctors, and masons. They were the friends of Khufu. And by telling their true story, we finally give them the honor they buried and earned 4,500 years ago.